My name is Leanne Onasa. I create digital soul portraits from star maps that we know as astrology charts. And I've chosen the sun vibration of the artist Frida Kahlo as my subject to show you how a light song is made. The method that I use is just as much science as it is art. Enjoy. The light song for Frida Kahlo, her sun sign. I thought I would start our journey with these two nuggets of wisdom. The reminder that we are a soul having a human experience and we're part of the cosmic dance that is being passengers on a planet that is revolving around the sun, that is moving through space. We are light, and our energy is such that we can't see the light that we are. This is the electromagnetic spectrum, and you see where we are as humans on the spectrum is outside the visible part, which is as low as 0.0035% of the entire spectrum is visible. It's a very, very, very low amount. This is the shape of light and is what I use to paint the portrait, to paint the conversations that are happening between the planets and celestial points in a star map, a birth chart. I wanted to add this in here because I wanted to make a point about light and dark. This is a light song, but it is as much about the light that is drawn as it is about the dark that is the spaces in between. The spaces in between the notes of a song are just as important as the notes being played, because if you don't have that space in between, you can't hear the music. This is my version of a yin yang, the balance of everything, the balance of light, the balance of dark, the balance of feminine, the balance of masculine, the balance of creation and inspiration. So now I'm going to touch a little bit on astrology. There is Eastern astrology that is based on the visible sky and star constellations. Then there is Western tropical astrology, which is based on the seasons. It's based on the light, the quality of light, the amount of light during the year. And the stars are used as signposts for when we are in the year. Those signposts have shifted over millennia. And so what we see in the sky no longer matches what we're using as a zodiac sign. Western tropical astrology has two main, I guess you could say, branches as well. The traditional form of astrology and then modern. I'll go into that a bit later. What I have studied and what this is based on, what the light songs are based on, is Western tropical astrology. And this is the circle of animals, otherwise known as the zodiac. So our ancestors, before we, went indoors and started with, having TVs and everything else, the sky was our entertainment. I guess you could say it was the sky TV of our ancestors. So they would watch the movement of the circle of animals throughout the year to understand where they were in the year. In the past, astrology was used as a predictive tool and a foretelling of omens, whether good or bad, often both. It was also inseparable from medicine and astronomy. It was used as part of the physician's toolkit for diagnosing and treating conditions. The Hippocratic Oath is associated with Hippocrates, and this is what Hippocrates had to say about astrology. Today, astrology is like an elaborate form of Myers-Briggs. Myers-Briggs, for those of you who aren't aware, is a personality test. Except astrology is far deeper and wider than any personality test. It's so vast you could actually spend lifetimes and still not have learned everything there is to learn about astrology. It is also used as a cosmic weather forecast, looking at the signs that are in the stars, having an understanding of whether today is a day where you're going to have to watch your P's and Q's because Mars is in a difficult aspect, or whether you're going to have to be patient with technology snafus because Mercury is retrograde. Things like that. That's what I mean by cosmic weather forecast. And today there's actually a renewal and revival of the more traditional and older forms of astrology. As I touched on before, it could take you lifetimes to learn everything there is to know about astrology. And this visual here I've put together to emphasize the point. Most of us learn about astrology or would have learned about astrology or the notion of astrology from reading a star sign horoscope. Used to be in newspapers and now online. That is called the star sign typically. Actually, it is the sun sign. And the sun is only one of the planets that are in the sky that are covered by astrology. So the horoscope, either in the newspaper or on the internet, that is the equivalent of a comic strip when compared to a library full of encyclopedias. That's why I've put this visual here, because that star sign horoscope is the equivalent of being a comic strip when you compare it to the vast amount of information and knowledge and depth of astrology. Some of the basics, Astrology 101. This is important for you to understand what goes into making a light song. This is effectively the horoscope, a 2D diagram of where the planets are in relation to the signs of the zodiac that are at a specific time and place, either one's birth or any moment in time. I've put people there on the middle line because that middle line is actually representative of the horizon. So the sun that actually rises in the east is on the left-hand side of the horoscope and goes from left to right. So if you imagine the sun rises above the people and travels and goes to the right and then disappears underneath where it's no longer visible below, in the below of the chart. To illustrate the point, here are planets in Frida's chart. So the moon and the sun, even though they're not planets, they are usually referred to when people talk about planets in astrology. They're also known as the luminaries. So this is a selection of the planets in Frida's chart based on the fact that they were in conversation with her sun at her time of birth. So this was what was in the sky, visible above the horizon line and not visible below the horizon line at Frida's time and place of birth. The planet is the what, the zodiac sign is the how, and the house is the where. Astrology is a language, and this is like what they call cookbook approach to astrology. The sun for Frida was in Cancer and in her 11th house. So you can actually string that together in a sentence. And I have taken this from a workbook of astrology for yourself by Demetra George and Douglas Block, where you can actually string together these sentences. So for Frida, her sun has an I statement, which is I will, Cancer, give and receive emotional warmth and security via social reform, causes, and ideals. Now, the how and the where has a number of options, and I've chosen what I feel are the most appropriate options for Frida. Once we know our sun sign, the next step in astrology is typically to learn about our big three. The first of those big three is your sun, which is your basic identity. The next is your rising sign, also called the ascendant. So the ascendant and the rising are exactly the same thing, it's just two different words. And that is your outward persona. That is how people perceive you. And last but not least is the moon, which is your emotional self and your daily routine or habits. This also translates into a sentence. Again, had different options, and I've chosen the options that I feel are most appropriate for Frida. I am mother comes from Frida's Cancer sun, her I am, wearing the mask of a performer, which is her Leo rising sign, with the soul of an earth spirit, which is her Taurus moon. Those of you who are familiar with Frida's life, you'll be aware that she attempted to become a mother. However, she had a number of miscarriages and also had to terminate pregnancies for fear of whether she would physically be able to see the births to term. I was surprised to read in Wikipedia that talks about all the abortions but doesn't talk about all the miscarriages, nor the fact that her womb was actually injured in a horrific trolley car accident when she was young. She was definitely the soul of an earth spirit. She had a menagerie of animals. She had like a monkey, a deer, a little deer, and all manner of animals, and a dog. So she definitely had the soul of an earth spirit. She even depicted herself with roots growing out of her in this work of hers that is called Roots. And I'm just going to touch on one of her other works that also conveys this earth spirit. So I hope that's given a bit of an insight to the artist that was Frida Kahlo, for those of you who may not be that familiar with her or her work. Back to her chart. This is what I call a person's sacred geometry. So you see the middle really looks like a bunch of geometric shapes. And what they are is actually tracing the lines of conversation between the different planets that were in the sky at the time of birth. Geometry is music for the eyes, says Robert Edward Grant. And again, this is a reminder that the geometry is from the planets in the sky, and we are passengers on Earth moving through space. The colours that I use are those attributed by Pythagoras, who was known as the father of music because of his development of the musical intervals. And that was from his study of the music of the spheres. And the spheres are actually the planets. Here are the colours that he attributed to each of the planets that were visible to people in his day. So it only went out to Saturn, because only out to Saturn is visible with the naked eye. And I've put the babushka dolls here to remind me to talk about the fact that each one of these planets, the luminaries included, gives us a layer of our light. So going back to my first point about we are light vibrating, each planetary vibration is a layer of our light body. What I've painted for Frida is her sun layer of her light body. In 1781, there was a revolution in the understanding of the sky with the discovery of Uranus, and then Neptune, and then Pluto. Not all in 1781, that was when Uranus was discovered. And what happened was astrology underwent transformation in having to accommodate these new discoveries. And this is where you have the two branches of traditional and modern. So the traditional are the original visible with the naked eye planets and includes them. And then you have the modern form of astrology that also includes the three planets that were later added. I've got here that they are the modern rulers. So the sign of Aquarius was ruled by Saturn, and then Uranus became its modern ruler. The sign of Pisces was ruled by Jupiter, and Neptune became its modern ruler. The sign of Scorpio was ruled by Mars, and Pluto became its modern ruler. Some astrologers will exclusively use the traditional rulerships. Some astrologers will use the modern rulers and the traditional rulers in conjunction with one another. Some astrologers will use both and have a traditional ruler and a modern ruler in their interpretations. As well as Pythagoras' color attributions, I use Nikola Tesla's 369 code. Every color formula I use, I have deliberately used formulas that reduce to a 3, a 6, or a 9 in order to vibrate. Numerologically speaking, it means that these colors have the vibrations of a 3, a 6, or a 9. And here is my rainbow lotus, as I call it. And these are the colors that I use for the zodiac, the circle of animals. And the zodiac is our earth perspective. The planets are the celestial perspective, and the zodiac is the earth perspective. And in figuring out what colors to use, I found this from the astrologer Stephen Forrest to be the most logical color associations with the zodiac signs. And he says that he uses the color wheel, starting with Aries, which is red, and going all the way round counterclockwise to Pisces, and uses the color wheel because that's how the optical part of our brain encodes its image of the world. I thought, yes, that makes sense. That's good enough for me. That's what I'm going to use. And while I'm speaking about this method, a lot of this actually was channeled. So this method and way of painting the soul is a co-creation. So I have co-created with the universe and was led, I feel, to discover these things to then bring a method together. I also have a method that I follow of how transparent the waves of light are, and when I use a planetary color and when I use a zodiacal color. Back to Frida and her sun vibration. Here is the rainbow lotus, and here are the waves of light of the conversations that were being had with the sun at the time that Frida was born. The next step is I apply the Hermetic principle of correspondence, which is commonly known as above, so below, as within, so without. And in order to create a living mandala, an animated mandala, I apply revolutions that again reduce to either a 3, a 6, or a 9. And this, voila, creates a digital soul portrait, a living mandala of the divine light within, and ultimately becomes the light song, in this case, Frida's soul or sun vibration. Fall in love with yourself, with life, and then with whoever you are. I love that quote of Frida's, and it's very appropriate for this work because the light song is really for the viewer to reflect, assuming it's their own light, for the viewer to reflect on their own divinity within. And the reason you would reflect on your own divinity within is to really fall in love with yourself and with life, and then with whoever you want. If you follow Frida's advice, which I can't say that I disagree. So that brings me to the end of the making of a light song. If this has sparked your interest in discovering your divine light within, I am going to leave my contact email so you can get in touch. It always starts with a conversation. I'll arrange a Zoom call where we get on a call for about 15 minutes and have a chat. And if you're worried about how much investment is required, I've deliberately made it commensurate with the cost of a 90-minute astrology reading. And just to manage expectations, this is not a reading, this is a purely visual form of astrology. It's a light song designed for the person to reflect on their divine light within, whether as a animated mandala or as a static artwork. So a bit more like traditional art is viewed, you know, where you have it on your wall and remind yourself of the beauty within you. And that reminds me, I liken this to, might sound strange, I liken this to The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, for those of you who are familiar with the book. There's also been at least a couple of movies made about it as well, where he had a portrait of himself, but it was his shadow. So the portrait that he had shoved away in a dark room was becoming uglier and uglier while he was doing all his misdeeds, and he remained looking beautiful and, you know, flush with youth until the portrait was discovered. Well, these LIGHTSong portraits are nothing like that, are like that, but are nothing like that, because instead of capturing the shadow, it's actually capturing your light. There is dark, but it's the space between the notes so that you can fully see and appreciate your light song. I'm going to close now and leave you with a beautiful testimonial that I was so grateful to receive. Bye for now. Lots of love from my heart's light to yours.